Hello and welcome to the final episode of Agri History. In this episode, we'll talk about the microbes and plants used in making beer, as well as their domestication and origins. First, you'll talk about Groot. Groot is a mix of herbs and spices, used as a flavor and preserving agent prior to the ascendancy of hops. Throughout most of history, Groot was only legally allowed to be made by certain royal and noble bloodlines, as well as certain monasteries. Groot was primarily used in the Netherlands, Flanders, and Western Germany. There were several plants used to make Groot. The most common ones were Bog Myrtle, marsh rosemary, laurel berries, Laserpitium sciller, resin hops themselves, anise, caraway, and juniper. The town of Devonator used Bog Myrtle, laurel berries, Laserpitium sciller, resin, and hops in the creation of their Groot. The town of Wessel used Bog Myrtle, laurel berries, Laserpitium sciller, and resin to make their Groot. The town of Dortmund used marsh rosemary, laurel berries, Laserpitium sciller, and hops in the creation of their Groot. The town of Cologne used all of the above except marsh rosemary. The town of Zwolle used the same herbs as Wesel. The town of Duisburg used Bog Myrtle, resin, and Laserpitium sciller. The town of Osnabrück used marsh rosemary, laurel berries, Laserpitium sciller, and resin. The area of Teckelsburg used the same herbs as Munster. The big five, however, were Bog Myrtle, marsh rosemary, laurel berries, and Laserpitium sciller, also known as laserwort, as well as resin. Bog Myrtle was the main ingredient in Groot, and if there was no Bog Myrtle available, they would use marsh rosemary instead. The fruit of both species were used for brewing and flavoring beer, and Bog Myrtle is said to have mildly narcotic properties. Or as the ancient brewer Matthias Odbel said, the same flour is also sometimes added to beer for lack of hops, and sometimes to make drunkards happy because Bog Myrtle makes one dim in the head and makes people happy in spirit. Paraphrasing, of course. Marsh rosemary also has narcotic properties, and both species are found in America and Europe. The other main ingredient that constantly pops up as a flavoring agent in Groot is laurel berries. Laserwort was the third main ingredient used in Groot. It was used for spicy and bitter tasting fruit as a flavoring agent, but it was also one of the most expensive ingredients used in Groot. The final ingredient used would be resin. Two books on making Groot list resin, specifically pine resin, as an ingredient in Groot. Due to the political climate of the Renaissance era, the heritability of jobs and control over certain businesses became outdated, and Groot became associated with the corrupt aristocracies of the past. And since the 14th century, beer made by independent brewers using nothing but hops was gaining traction, and as a result, Groot disappeared from the public eye and eventually disappeared completely. And to this day, we do not have a complete picture on how Groot was made. Hops is part of the same family as cannabis, and both share a common ancestor. Due to the antibacterial properties of this plant, it has been used as a flavoring agent in ale and lager, as well as several other beers, for hundreds of years. The earliest use of hops as a flavoring agent is found in the 6th century, where a single grain of pollen was found in a wooden barrel that once contained some sort of alcoholic beverage. There are two species and several subspecies used in common cultivation: the Japanese hop and several subspecies of the common hop like Cordifolus, which is found in Eastern Asia and Japan, Neo-Mexicanus, which is found in Western America, Pubescens, which is found in the Midwestern United States, Lupinoides, which is found in Central and Eastern North America, and Lupulus, which is found in Europe but has been introduced to North America. Based on current genetic data, common lupin and another species of lupin called Humulus scandens diverged from each other 6.38 million years ago, and all the populations of our common hops diverged from each other between 1.5 and 1.27 million years ago, and their differentiation occurred between 0.46 and 0.69 million years ago. The first recordings of domesticated hops occurred in the 9th century within historical documents such as Systema Agricultura, such as the green and brown hops, the garlic hop, the Kent hop, and the Worcester hop. In the 19th century, interest in improving plants became paramount, and by 1901, over 20 English varieties of hop were described, and later on, 20 Bavarian varieties were found, and 60 European varieties have been found as well. In 1904, breeding programs were put in play to increase the amount of preserving agents called alpha acid within the hops themselves. Examples of these cultivars include Y Northdown, Y Target, and Y Challenger. After that, there was a push towards increasing the amount of aroma. To this end, they used the Fugel and Golding selections, which were the remnants of the bygone era of the earliest hop cultivars. The first beer yeast we will discuss is called Saccharomyces Cerevisiae. This is the main yeast used to make ale beers. There are many studies regarding strains of this yeast, such as clinical, wild, and wine strains. However, two recent studies have found that the ale strains of this yeast are genetically distinct from their wild stock and can be divided into two separate lineages. And based on current genetics, the earliest common ancestors dated around the 15th to 16th century AD. This happened well after the earliest known beer instance, which was between 3000 and 4000 BC. But this also happened prior to the 19th century, where microbes were discovered. The main difference between the domesticated form and the wild form of this yeast is the ability for this yeast to ferment maltriose, an important carbon source in many beers. This trait evolved twice using different genetic pathways in two different lineages of ale beer yeast. This suggests strong selection pressure. The next and last yeast you'll talk about is called Saccharomyces Pasteurianus. This yeast species is used as lager yeast to make a lager beer. This species originated as a hybridization between two species of yeast, a wild form of the ale yeast and a wild yeast species, called Saccharomyces eubanus. Lager yeast is divided into two main distinct lineages. The first is called the Saz, the second is called the Verberg. The nature of these two lineages suggests convergent evolution of these two domestication events. There are three different hypotheses on how this process happened. The first one is that the hybridization between these two species happened twice, and each one was independently domesticated. This is supported by the direct phylogenetic evidence and the differences between the two genomes of the two lineages. Another hypothesis suggests that the two lineages evolved from one single domestication event. This is supported by the breakpoints within the genetic code of all lager strains of yeast, although there's explanations for this as well that fit within the first hypothesis. The third hypothesis is a combination of the first two. The initial hybridization between the two species of yeast created the primordial Saz yeast. This yeast then hybridized with another ale yeast of some sort, breeding the Verberg lineage. To this day, further recreations of the initial crossbreeding have been done, and many potential new beer yeasts. And so ends agri-history, but not the channel itself. 3 new series are coming soon. The first is Agri-History Tropical Edition, where we'll do the same thing but from a tropical standpoint, and discuss stuff like bananas, citrus, and mangoes. We will also do Agri-History Revisited, which will involve new videos on cherries, plums, and peaches. And finally, the Agri-History Podcast, which will involve interviews with breeders and domesticators of today's age. So you've got plenty to look forward to, so stay tuned and have a good one.